Well, it is quite a pleasure to be back in Des Moines again. I am in town. I appreciate the hospitality. I'm at the Mission House, and that's a tremendous blessing. Last night I was recording, yesterday I had a table at Bethel University talking to the kids about a creation club and the hydroplate, and had a long conversation with a guy who believed in the old earth, and he was doing a lot of mental gymnastics to try and make it fit in the Bible, and I kept asking him questions, and so we just plant seeds. You know, at the end he finally said, I haven't really studied this enough. And I said, okay, well, you need to see both sides. And so we just plant seeds, and then last night I recorded the Twin Cities Creation Science Association speaker, and instead of driving an hour and a half back to north to St. Cloud, and then coming back through rush hour traffic today, I just headed down here after the talk. And so we rolled in around 3, but it was just so nice to be able to come here. And it's nice to be in a state that doesn't have, in the boys' bathroom, they don't have girls' stuff in there. You guys are thinking clearer down here than up there. And so all those Minnesota, Iowa jokes, I think Iowa wins. Yeah, you guys got a lot clearer thinking. And so, I'm down here. And tomorrow and Friday, I'm going to have a table at Faith Bible Baptist College. I'm going to be trying to start a creation club there and maybe talk or wherever, just trying to plant seeds. And then Friday night and Saturday, I'm going to have a table over at the Reclaim Your Health conference. It's Iowa Informed Choice, or Informed Choice Iowa. I'm going to have that. I had a table next to them at the Iowa Homeschool Convention, and they invited me to have a table, so I'm going to have a table there. And there's a lot of information that is out there. There's some of it on the table, and Pastor said, take a look at it. We need all the information to make informed decisions, And so, we're going to talk about Grand Canyon tonight. So, and to help you do some Christmas shopping, there's a book back there. It's Willie the Woodsman. It's written and illustrated by my son. And it's a story about a boy and his pet dinosaur. And he relates it to Noah's flood, and it's very clever. It's very plausible this could have happened, the way he writes it, and it ends up with the gospel. And then he's also got one at Chippy and Chetty Learn to Work. One of them he plays all summer, and the other one prepares all summer, and then the snow flies, and you see which one made the wiser choice. And he also has the gospel there too. So that's a way that you can witness. They're available on Amazon. These 2 videos, the How to Win the Culture War, these are free. Just take one per family. There's 3 talks on here. One of them's at Pensacola State College, 120-some students, and that was an interesting talk. And then this other one is Revival of Truth, and it's Behind the Vaccine Curtain. We need to know what vaccine experts are saying under oath. And the guy who asks some questions under oath, he wrote a book, and that book's on the table too. It's called Vaccines, Amen, the Religion of Vaccines. And he just uses government documents, vaccine inserts, and expert testimonies to argue his case. And he's really sharp, really sharp. And then there's other talks that you can see on the Rumble channel, Revival of Truth. I've been censored on YouTube sometimes, so I had to start a Rumble channel. And then I've been busy interviewing people for the Hydroplate Week of Celebration. We're going to celebrate the first week of December. We're going to be playing interviews of people that knew Walt, people that used the hydroplate, and it's just going to be a big week of everything hydroplate. And hopefully those books will be available for Christmas. And let's see, Monday night, I debated a paleontologist on the origin of Grand Canyon. And this you can see on my channel. I've got a YouTube channel called Solidify Your Faith. Everybody can grab one of these cards. So you got the YouTube channel, and my email's on there if you have any questions. And and it's also on the Standing for Truth YouTube channel. They have debates like all the time on every topic, and that's what we need. We need to see both sides argue their case. We need to see the strengths and weakness of both sides so we can think, and that doesn't happen enough. And again, this is the reason why I'm down at that Reclaim Your Health conference. I'm going to have a big poster on this inconvenient study. This was a study that was done 5 years ago at the Henry Ford Hospital, and it showed that the vaccinated were twice as likely to have a chronic disease. and the doctor won't publish it because his bosses don't want him to. If he does, he's going to get fired. And then Senator Ron Johnson had a hearing on it on September 8th at the congressional hearing, and then he submitted it into the public record. And now the Highwire, they made a documentary, so that's called aninconvenientstudy.com. And again, just get all the information to make informed decisions, because there are people that are biased that don't want all the information out there. And the hospital actually sent him a letter saying, we're going to sue you for defamation if you release this video. And he said, I got it all on hidden camera. I'm just telling people what he told me. So it's a very interesting one. That, I think, is the tip of the spear for the avalanche of truth that's coming. I think it's gonna be very interesting. Okay, but now this is why you're here. This is the Grand Canyon. And I went out there finally. I've been hearing about it my whole life, but I went out there because there's a videographer who wants to make a hydroplate documentary. And so we both went out on a trip, and yeah, he took some footage there. And if you're ever interested in doing it, we flew in Thursday on Friday night, or yeah, flew in Thursday, Friday you're on the rim, Saturday you're on the river, and then Sunday you're flying home. It's through creationtoday.org, otherwise The Starting Point, something with Jay Seegert. They do a similar trips, and it's really a neat way to do it. You just show up and eat. They take care of the driving, the parking, the tickets, and it's just such an easy way to see it. And we never did this. I guess this is on an Indian reservation. Yeah. Pay $120, you can walk out there and look straight down through the glass floor. Anybody ever been to Grand Canyon? Anybody? Okay, there's one of them. You can see it like this. I was talking to an older lady who said, when you do this, the guide said, nose on toes. If you're walking, look where you're stepping. You don't want to trip. If you want to look around, stop, and then look around. He says, this is not where you want to trip. And this one, I just can't even imagine getting on a mule doing that. And Helmut Welke was telling me about the guy who raises these mules, and he had an old mule that he brought down with another mule, and they camped, and he woke up in the morning and the old mule was dead. And if you bring it in, you got to get it out. And it cost him $4,000 of helicopter trips to get it out. Yeah. And then this is another way too. We were on the river, but we didn't do that part of the river. We went upstream instead of downstream. So today we're going to take a look at some facts about Grand Canyon, look at some of the questions that you need to ask about it, and then how government tries to answer them and they can't, and then the real answers, and then a summary. So here we go with the facts. The fact is Grand Canyon exists. Been there, done that, I've seen that. And there's two interpretations. One is the government's interpretation. They'd say, hey, it was formed slowly with a little water and a lot of time. And then there's the hydroplate conclusion that says, no. It was quickly with lots of water and a little time. And what you have to watch out for is the government likes to erase the line between the facts and their conclusion. And this is I had a science book that I had. Fact is a verifiable piece of information, whereas a conclusion is a judgment based upon the facts. And the news media often mix the facts with conclusions without indicating which is which. Well, guess what? The science books do that too, especially when they say millions or billions of years. And this is the government's website. This is National Park System, and this is, notice if you can see the facts and the conclusion. It says the park is dominated by the spectacular Grand Canyon, twisting 1 mile deep and 277-mile long gorge, formed during some 6 million years of geological activity and erosion by the Colorado River. You see that? The fact is that the canyon exists. It's 1 mile deep, 277 miles long. That's a fact. That's verifiable. Okay, but then they just go on and says it was formed some 6 million years with erosion. Okay, that's their conclusion. And they did it in the same sentence. They don't separate one for the other. So you have to do this on your own because they're not going to do it for you. And it says that the story of how Grand Canyon came to be, the story begins about 2 billion years ago. So this is a story. Just like this science textbook at St. Cloud State. The origin of the geosphere is the story of the birth of our planet. The story begins in an immense cloud. So this is a story. If you miss that part of the website or that part of the textbook, you think you're being taught science. No, you're being taught a story. this imagination. And it's real similar to a fairy tale. Once upon a time, that river cut that canyon. And this isn't science. And I'm paying for this textbook definition. National Academy of Sciences defines science as the use of evidence to construct testable explanations and predictions of natural phenomena. So science has to be testable. If it's not testable, it's not science. So we need to start asking questions about Grand Canyon. Yeah, the first question is, hey, how does the river flow uphill to cut the canyon? Because it flows into the canyon at 3,100 feet above sea level, and it flows out at 1,200 feet. And then in the middle, it rises a mile above the river. So did that river flow uphill for millions of years to start cutting that canyon to get it down to where it is today? That's no way, no way. And if the river cut the canyon, what cut the side canyons? They're just as deep and they don't got a river. And why are the northern ones bigger than the southern ones? And then why didn't the river flow around the Kaibab Plateau? That green thing, that's the Kaibab Plateau that rises up. Why didn't it? It should have flown around it, but it flows right through it. And how does a little river cut a canyon 10 miles wide? You know, if that's the case, why don't we have these canyons everywhere on Earth? I mean, the river's been flowing that long everywhere else. And why did the river cut down into the hard crystalline rock of the inner gorge instead of getting wider into the softer sedimentary rock? It should have got wider, but it didn't. And what force removes 800 cubic miles from the Grand Canyon? And before you do that, you got to remove 2,000 cubic miles of sediment above the Grand Canyon to begin doing that. And before you do that, you got to remove 133,000 cubic miles from the Great Staircase. And my interpretation of this is that blue box, all that sediment, you notice that arrow on the left? That's the Kaibab limestone. That's what you stand on the Grand Canyon. And notice a mile of sediment above that. All that stuff had to get removed. And I think that blue box, all that stuff up there, got removed with tsunamis after the flood. The big waves just came and sheet eroded that. The stuff in the black box, I think, that got eroded from two lakes that drained. That's from Echo Cliffs to the Grand Canyon. And how does Red Butte form? It's got 1,000 feet of Mesozoic sediment that's kind of crumbly, and then there's volcanic rock on top. You know, and I asked that to the paleontologist on Monday. He goes, well, that just happens. You know, they got all these just so stories. Well, that just happens. Well, that's not telling me how it happened. And then how does a 5 to 10 ton rock get raised into sedimentary layer of rock? It got formed down here and it got moved up there. That's a tough one. And how did the funnel form? And I asked him about that. It's 12 miles wide, 18 miles long, and he says, oh, those are everywhere. And I said, no, they're not. He goes, oh, yeah, the Mississippi has one. No, they don't. That funnel's 2,000 feet high on the edges. This is very unique. And then, well, how about this pothole? It's formed by rapidly flowing water. Something got in there and kept going round and round. And if you look to the top left, that's the bottom of the canyon, 2,000 feet below. How does that get? And it's 4 miles from the river on a 2,000-foot cliff. How do you cut something like that? And then how do barbed canyons form? Those are the red canyons. They're flowing to the northeast. The Colorado River is flowing to the southwest. How does that happen? And he said, yeah, that happens all the time. It's like, no, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. And why are layers so flat? They're like pancakes. And why isn't there any erosion? You know, wouldn't it rain once in a while in millions of years? Wouldn't it get mixed up with gophers and other rodents? And how do slanted layers form under flat layers? And why are 7 of the geological layers missing? And maybe the ones on top got eroded away, but how about the ones on the bottom? You know, the Silurian and the Ordovician? And why are those? What happened to them? And missing talus. I took this picture. We were on the river, and our guide, she says, yeah, that's fresh stuff that fell. Talus is stuff that crumbles from a cliff. Okay, and she says that's rather new because the rock inside hasn't weathered much. And then she said there's not any grass or vegetation growing there. She said that one's rather new. And why does that happen? And she said she's heard it, you know, and she can see it in the lake, you know, at Lake Powell or Lake Mead, Glen Canyon, whatever's behind the Glen Canyon Dam. And she says it sounds like explosion, just and then it crumbles in. Because it rains and it snows and it freezes there and it gets in the cracks and it expands and then eventually it gives way. And there's not millions of years of talus there. And then what force raises a plateau a mile high? And that's the key to Grand Canyon. That's why it's there. It's got a big plateau, and that plateau had a lot of water up there. And then where'd all the dirt go? The tour guide, he used to say, he'd say, show the Grand Canyon, and he'd say, yeah, I dug that. And a little kid asks him, well, where'd you put the dirt? And he said that question haunted him the rest of his life. Where did all that dirt go? Okay, so here's how the government has their answers to all these questions, which they don't answer, but this is from their website. It says, scientists know the Colorado River carved Grand Canyon. How do they know that? You know, they can think that, they can believe that. If they know that, okay, I want to see their scientific journals from 6 million years ago. I want to see them recording how much it eroded each year. But they don't. They believe that, but they just state it as a fact. And remember that story that we're learning, that's the plot of the story, the river carved the canyon. You can have all these side stories, but that's the main plot. They aren't going to change that. And it says the Kaibab Plateau, a high point through which the river gingerly slices, poses a problem for geologists. Well, what do you think that is? It's water certainly doesn't flow uphill. Yeah, no kidding. I didn't see that in the placards at the Grand Canyon, though. I didn't see that, not that we were looking at a whole lot of stuff. We were on the move a lot. But while keeping these few accepted chapters in the Colorado River history book in mind, they came up with some hypotheses. So the main theory, the main chapter is the river carved the canyon. And then it goes on to say, and these are the hypotheses. This is what they come up with. The Little Colorado River hypotheses. In order for this theory to work, the ancestral Colorado River would have needed to flow eastward over the Continental Divide. So let's take a look at this. And this is kind of a neat website. This is, oh, the next one is, but this is Grand Canyon in the black box, and there's the Continental Divide in the red, flowing right there through New Mexico. And this is the website I like. It's en-us.topographic-map.com. You can go in there and you can click on anything. You could see how high the elevation is of this church or your house or wherever. And I went in there and I clicked on the mouth of the river flowing into Grand Canyon. It's 3,100 feet. And over in New Mexico at the Continental Divide, it's 10,000 feet. There it's 5,700 feet there. So that's 3,000 feet. That's half a mile that river's got to flow uphill. And they told us that water doesn't flow uphill. So you can throw that hypothesis out. And then this one, the northwest flowing river hypothesis. In order for this to work, the Kaibab Plateau couldn't look quite like it does today. And it says, unfortunately, no sedimentary deposits have been found to support this theory. So throw that theory out. It's not really a theory, it's a hypothesis. And then the spillover theory. Now they're getting close. They're getting warmer, because that's what I promote, a spillover theory. Catastrophic draining of ancient lakes. That's my position. But they have the lake in the wrong spot. It says the Colorado River was temporarily dammed behind the Kaibab Plateau. Okay, so let's take a look at the Kaibab Plateau. That's that dark part in the middle, and the canyon cuts right through it. Flows in at 3,100 feet, flows out at 1,200 feet. And at the middle, in the middle where it cuts through, that north rim is 8,000 feet high. Yeah, that's like 1.5 miles high. And on the south rim, it's like 7,400 feet. Okay, but if you go farther south than that, it's 6,400 feet. So it should have flowed around the bottom of it easily, or it should have gone around the top of it, because that's only 5,300 feet. Okay, and so if that Kaibab Plateau held back the big lake, it should have flown over the north. That Grand Canyon should be on the north part there, but it's not. Okay, and then they've got another one. This is a collapse of a groundwater karst system, and it's very new and it's still being developed, therefore it doesn't have any evidence. So throw that one out. And so if you want to see all the proposals, you can get the hydroplate theory, PDF, just download it. And you get it at HPT for hydroplate.rsr, that's Real Science Radio, rsr.org, and you go to page 237 and they got all the proposals, and it's red, yellow, and green. Red means no, doesn't work. Yellow means maybe it could work, and green says yeah, it does work. And you look under the hydroplate one and it's green all the way down on the left. The features of Grand Canyon are there on the left, and it's green all the way down. And I submitted this theory to the National Park System, and they've yet to put it up on their website. So I guess I'm not holding my breath for that. But if you want to hear more about why the river didn't cut the canyon, you go into rsr.org and search Grand Canyon Month. And they spend a whole month talking about how it doesn't make sense what the government is telling us. And so here are the real answers. And the key to Grand Canyon is bulging and cracking 3 times. But in order to understand it, you really need to have a little basic understanding of the hydroplate theory. Does anybody hear that talk last summer? Anybody? Okay, good. Well, this will be review for you. Just think of the Earth as, it posits that half of the ocean was inside the Earth at one time. So just think of the Earth as a big apple, and the skin of the apple is is granite. 30 to 60 miles thick. It's granite. And underneath that is a layer of water, maybe a mile or two of water down in there. And then underneath that there's the mantle. And then the moon tugs on the crust of the earth and makes it hotter. It's expand and contract, makes the water hotter and hotter. And eventually it becomes supercritical, where it starts, it's not really water, it's not really steam, but whatever it does, it dissolves things like crazy. So now it's dissolving the crust above and the mantle below, and the crust is getting weaker and weaker, and it's getting hotter and hotter and more pressure, up to 372,000 psi, pounds per square inch. That's a lot of pressure on that water. And then it eventually the crust gets so weak that it just explodes out of there. It cracks the earth, cracks the crust of the earth, and that crack goes in two directions all the way around the earth and comes back together like a seam on the baseball. So now you got these cliffs that are going all around the world, and they're crumbling into this high velocity water coming out of there, and it's eroding. That's where we get the sediment for the sedimentary rock, and it's eroding, and those cliffs get wider and wider and wider, and pretty soon there's nothing pushing down on the mantle, and it bulges. Okay, and then the continents start sliding. And so now you got North and South America sliding west, and you got Africa and Europe sliding east, and they keep on going until they meet resistance. And then there's a whole bunch of friction and a bunch of heat and a bunch of compression, and that's where you see Gunnison Canyon. Those are 15-foot trees on the other side of that canyon. And so what force would have that much energy to crush that much granite, to compress that much granite? And I would submit to you it's the plates are sliding. One end stops, the other end keeps going, and that's how you get the force to compress all that. And you get the same stuff at the bottom of Grand Canyon. The Vishnu schist has the same compression features. So how do you get that? Well, you got these layers, and they're all sorted out really flat and really pure. And how did that happen? Well, when the water's shooting out, the plates are, the water's shooting up, and then the plate will slam down, and then the water will build up pressure, and then it'll shoot up again. So the plates are vibrating. So that's going to, and there's water, so that's going to start sorting things. Plus there's waves going across, those tsunamis going across, because there aren't any continents to break up the tides. And then that's going to sort the stuff on the top. So that's how you get the layers real smooth. And they're on the plates that are sliding, and then the plates run into resistance, and they buckle. So then some of the stuff is angled because it's still on the plate, but some of the stuff just keeps on sliding, and it bevels it off. And that's how you get the flat layers, and that's how you get the slanted layers under the flat layers. And there's a quartzite layer that's slanted, and one of the blocks got lifted up in that mud. There's all that force that lifted it up, and then that's where it came to rest. 5 to 10 tons lifted up, and that's supposed to be millions of years. That doesn't make sense. And so and those are Walt Brown's grandkids there. And this is at Isis Temple. It takes like a day or two of hiking, so you really need to know what you're doing to go there. And to put some validity to this, you notice that the mountain ranges are pretty parallel to the mid-Atlantic ridge. And I think that's what happened. And the Rockies are bigger, twice as big as the Andes, and I think it's because North America slid over the oceanic ridge. Okay, and so now you got mountains. That's a big mass on a small base. That's going to sink in. If something sinks in, something's got to rise up. And that's the plateaus. It squirts the magma to the side, and it builds up pressure, and then they just pop up one block at a time. And then some of that lava gets to the top occasionally, and it gets to the magma gets to the top, turns into lava, and it's hard. And then when a bunch of water comes through with the great denudation, it hits the hard stuff and goes around, and it washes away the side stuff, and that's how you get Red Butte. 1,000 feet of sediment capped with volcanic rock. And I took a picture of it going on that bus with all those creationists, 50 creationists on the bus. And there it is. It's on the right as you drive up from Phoenix. And then you'll notice that there's something real similar called Cedar Mountain on the edge of Grand Canyon. And you take a picture of that at Desert Views Tower. That's 900 feet of sediment on top of the Kaibab limestone. And I'm standing on the Kaibab limestone as I take that picture. That tells me that all that sediment was, 900 feet of limestone was above where I was. And that's and all that stuff had to get removed before you could cut the Grand Canyon. Grand Canyon's got 800 cubic miles that has to be removed. But before you do that, you got to get all that sediment, 900 to 1,000 feet of sediment off of that whole area. How is that going to happen? That's 2,000 cubic miles, called the Great Denudation. And before you can do that, you got to get 133 cubic miles with the Grand Staircase. All that had to be removed. And again, I think that blue box got wiped off with tsunamis, and then that stuff underneath with the black box, that's because of 2 lakes. So what we're looking at here is just the red box from Echo Cliffs, or Vermilion Cliffs to Grand Canyon, not the blue box. And that all happened because there was a lot of water, big lakes. And when you look at the satellite images, you see the lake beds. They're just a little bit different color than everything else around them. And then when you fill that up with water, you get all these national parks. You get arches and canyon lands, and then down in Hopi Lake, you got the petrified forest. And I got some petrified wood from the Hopi Reservation. Okay, and this is rather colorful. It's got reds in it, and it's got yellows in it. And I got this in the petrified forest of Mississippi. And this is brown and tan. And this is colorful. I think this wood petrified under the ground. I think this wood petrified in the lake. He said, Walt Brown says there's a lot of silica in that lake, and when that lake cooled off, it had to go somewhere. It precipitated into the wood. I think that's why it's different. And so those are the big lakes, but then there was water in the ground too after Noah's flood. Okay, and so they think there could have been more water in the ground than water in the lakes, and that's a lot of water. And notice Bryce Canyons and Zion Canyons, those are right on the edge of the lake. So all those features have to do with the same event, these big lakes. And Grand Lake was huge. It's twice as big as Lake Michigan, and it's 5,700 feet above sea level. And that's a lot of potential energy. And it's in 4 states. If you were in Farmington, New Mexico, in the middle right there, it'd be 350 feet deep. That's a deep lake. But if you go up to Grand Junction, it's 1,100 feet. And if you go down to Page, Arizona, it's 1,400 feet. That's a lot of water. A lot of water. And then you go down to Hopi Lake, that's about the size of Lake Huron, and that's 250 feet higher. So even more potential energy. And that's what potential energy is. It's this, when it's stored up energy. This is potential. If I let it go, then it becomes kinetic energy. But it's stored up, and you got 3 Great Lakes high up in the air, a lot of potential energy, and the cities there would be under about 1,000 feet of water. That's a lot of water. And this Grand Lake is held back by this Vermilion Cliff system. And that's just the shore. It's not a cliff yet. It's just holding back the big lake. And then once it starts to go over that, then there's no stopping it. That's how the funnel's going to form, and that arrow is pointing at the pothole. That's where that pothole was, on a 2,000-foot cliff 4 miles from the river. And then it's 12 miles wide at the mouth of the funnel, and it's 18 miles long. And to put that in perspective, there's Niagara Falls. Niagara Falls is 3/4 of a mile. So this funnel is like 15 times bigger than Niagara Falls. And just think of all that water that's gushing out, and it's cutting a slot down until it hits the hard Kaibab limestone. And that's why I think this didn't happen right after the flood, because the Kaibab limestone would still be mud. It would have just kept on going. And the sides would have just slumped in. They would have been hard. So it took whatever time it was, maybe 100 years, maybe 200 years, I don't know. But it cuts down and hits the hard Kaibab limestone, and then it spreads out and makes the funnel. And it removes that 1,000 feet of sediment at least, and now there's nothing pushing down on the Kaibab limestone, so then it cracks. It bulges and it cracks. Remember, the key to Grand Canyon is bulging and cracking 3 times. This is the first bulge and crack. So it bulges and cracks, so now the water runs through the crack. That's Marble Canyon. It's different than Grand Canyon. And it goes and it cuts underneath the Hopi Lake. So now you got 2 lakes draining catastrophically. And that Hopi Falls, Walt Brown says, it's 13 times higher than Niagara Falls and might have 100 times the water flow. So that's a lot of kinetic energy coming. And it's just sheet eroding everything on top of the Kaibab limestone. And all that stuff, eventually, there's nothing pushing down, so that whole plateau bulges and cracks. And then the water gushes through the cracks to cut out Grand Canyon. But before we get to that, let's look at that Kaibab Plateau. on the right part of it, that stuff's going to be flowing to the east, downhill, right? And yet the crack is going to the west. And so that's how you get the barbed canyons. The stuff is, it got lifted up, the groundwater is flowing to the northeast, but the crack is going to the southwest. That's how you get the barbed canyons. And then it's cutting through the Grand Canyon, and it's cutting below the water table. And so all the water's gushing in from the sides, and that's going to cause the other stuff either to get eroded in, or it's going to undercut a lot of stuff, and that's just going to drop down. And so that's how you get the side canyons. It's the groundwater draining because the crack is lower than the water table. And that's why you get the side canyons, and that's why they're longer to the north than to the south, because the north rose higher. The north was at 8,000 feet, and the south was at like 7,400 feet. So there was more water to drain. That's why the canyons are longer to the north. Okay, now we're looking at the Grand Canyon being cut. Okay, all that water, it bulged, it's cutting through there, it gets down to the hard granite, and it should have got wider. That's what should have happened, according to their theories, but it didn't. And why didn't it? Well, it's because there wasn't any it moved all 800 cubic miles, there wasn't anything pushing down on the basement rock. So the basement rock bulges and cracks, and that's how you get the inner gorge. That's how you get this 46-mile long river through that hard stuff when it should have gotten wide. And it's right at the bottom it's right in the middle of Inner Gorge. That's where the bulge and the crack was. And then where'd all the water go? It just went all the way down to the Gulf of California, probably 100 miles wide on each side. It was just a huge flow. And what they find is, and Walt Brown says this, if you're driving, let's see, I think which way, you'd be driving there, and if you look down in the gullies, you can see it. You can see these big boulders in the gullies. And he says 100 or 200 miles to the east and west of the Colorado River, south of Lake Mead, you see big rounded boulders, which means that was a powerful flow. It was strong enough to move boulders, and it was strong enough to break off the edges to round them. And yet they're surrounded by sand. That means it stopped quickly. The sand didn't go away. And then there's large rounded boulders that have been found a mile away, 100 feet above the river at Bullhead City. Where's Bullhead City? It's right there. That's a long way. And that was just sheet eroding. And I interviewed a pilot for that the week of celebration. And he said when you take off from Arizona, or take off from San Diego, it's like you're flying over the floodplain for the Grand Canyon. So if you want to hear his perspective of that, that's going to be December 1 to 6. I'm not sure which day we're going to air that one. But okay, to wrap this up, just a review. Bulging and cracking 3 times. That's the key. Okay, remember and it's all because the lakes were up on the Colorado Plateau. That's why the Grand Canyon is there, and that's why it's not at the Mississippi. You know, that wasn't a mile high. Okay, so you had these 2 huge lakes, enough of water for 3 Great Lakes, and when they finally went, Grand Lake, it finally went over the edge, and it cut into the Vermilion Cliffs, and it went down to the hard Kaibab limestone. It spread out, eroded all that, at least 1,000 feet of sediment. So there's nothing pushing down on the Kaibab limestone, so it bulges and cracks. Water flows through the crack and undercuts Hopi Lake, and now you got 2 lakes wiping everything off of the Kaibab limestone, and so that whole plateau bulges and cracks, and the water flows through the crack in the plateau and takes out 800 cubic miles, and now there's nothing pushing down on the basement rock, so the basement rock bulges and cracks. So that's bulging and cracking 3 times. And what I'm trying to do is do what Thomas Chamberlain. He was president of the University of Wisconsin and the first head of the geology department at the University of Chicago. And he was pretty sharp, and he published a paper and he warned researchers not to let one hypothesis dominate their thinking. Instead, they should always have or seek multiple working hypotheses so they can sharpen their analytical skills and develop thoroughness and reduce biases and think independently. You know, develop critical thinking skills, which is needed. You know, there's a drastic need for critical thinking. Otherwise, people just simply memorize and conform. And I made a lot of them at St. Cloud State. They know what to think, but they don't know how to think. And when I meet someone who can think, it's like, man, where'd you go to school? And typically, I was homeschooled. But you need to see both theories and think. And they aren't doing it in our government schools, museums, or media. So I'm calling to the creation organizations to set the example, because there's flood models in the museum. Those are catastrophic plate tectonic models. Okay, that's just a secular model sped up. They took plate tectonics and tried to squeeze it into the Bible. Just like theistic evolutionists, they take a secular model of evolution and slap a cross on it and try and squeeze it in the Bible. And that we shouldn't do that. We should start with the Bible. Okay, so you've got these, they've got their model, and I'm saying put up another model, put up the hydroplate model. Put up both models so people can think. Set an example for the government, schools, and museums. Let people think. And then I want to start the hydroplate protocol. Before you propose your theory, show us how many accurate predictions you have. What accurate predictions have you made? What predictions are you expecting to have confirmed? What are your current predictions? And if you're a Christian organization, what Bible verses support your theory as opposed to other theories? And the hydroplate theory knocks it out of the park. You know, it really does. And yeah, and that's what I would like to see. And Walt Brown says, and I'm trying to get a scientific revolution going. You know, widespread belief systems seldom change when frequently reinforced by influential institutions such as universities, media, religious institutions, and the scientific and intellectual elite. Well, that's where we're at. They got their pet theories, and they don't want any competition, and they try to destroy anybody who wants to compete. You know, the creationists have been censored for decades. Okay, and yeah, we're just trying to get the catastrophic plate tectonic guys to sit down and talk with the hydroplate guys and just compare the strengths and weaknesses of each theory. And we can't get them to sit down. And it's unfortunate because there's some bad blood between each side, and it's enough blame to go around for both sides. I wish we would just focus on the theory. You know, let's just look at science. And then Walt says, when a vast number of people realize that they've been misled, an intellectual revolution begins. And that's what I'm trying to do. I'm planting seeds wherever I go and saying, we've been misled with this Grand Canyon icon. That is just false as can be, and I want to dismantle all those icons one at a time. And they got the errors in the textbooks. I pointed them out to the curriculum director, and they don't change it. The school superintendent doesn't change it. School board doesn't change it. So I'm just going to the people. And I was going to go to St. Louis. They had a convention, science conference, and all the creation scientists were going to be there. And I was going to try and have a hydroplate table there and talk to them about it. And somebody told me, don't waste your time. Their minds are made up. Go to the homeschoolers. And so that's what I did. I went up to Duluth in Minnesota. I went to here in Des Moines, and I just registered for next year. So I'll be back. Well, I don't know if I'll be back here, but I'll be back there. It depends how much your pastor likes me. So put a good word in for me. But yeah, that's where the battle is. We want people to think critically, and I think there should be a race right now. Which creation organization is going to allow people to think about flood models? That's going to be a big feather in their hat as history looks back on them. Instead of just pounding one dogma all the time, they should allow both perspectives. And so there should be a race. They can't be the first one to get the hydroplate in the museum, because Broken Bow, Nebraska, in their Boneyards Museum, they've got the hydroplate theory. So they've got the feather in their hat there, and it's just going to see who's going to be second. But what I'd really like to see is both models. Give us both models, show us their accurate predictions, show us their biblical support, and then show us their model. Which museum is going to do that first? And I got my ideas. Of all of them, I would guess ICR. You know, Dr. Randy Galuza. I have so much respect for him. You know, when he took over, he wrote a letter out to everybody. He said, you know, I've been advised to promote the ICR brand. He says, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to promote creation. And then he went through and he thanked all these creation, small ones, organizations, and Walt Brown's was one of them. And that was a small crack in the censorship. And then he had hydroplate guys come in to present for 4 hours to his scientists. He said, I want my scientists to know what the theories are. And I don't want to know what people say about the hydroplate people. I want to hear what the hydroplate people have to say. And that's how science should be. Just get these ideas out there. And down at the bottom here it says, observers of this revolution should know which side avoids a rational scientific debate. Well, it's the catastrophic plate tectonic guys. They aren't stepping up to the plate. You know, we were trying to get it on Standing for Truth, you know, have this roundtable discussion, not even a debate. Let's just talk about each theory, you know, and they didn't show up, or they wouldn't do it. So we had a hydroplate seminar instead, you know. And then one of the organizations, the head leader, and I really like him. It's really too bad what's going on, but I have a lot of respect for him. A lot of respect. He wants to, you know, I want to learn about these theories, you know, and but he said he's getting resistance. There's people that don't want it to happen. And one of the experts, they wanted to have pre-approved questions for this. It's like, what? You're the expert. You should be able to answer any question any time. There shouldn't be pre-approved anything. Let's just talk about it. So the hydroplate people are willing to step up and just discuss it. You know, we could be wrong on some areas. Probably we are. But with all the accurate predictions, I think the framework is right. And if the framework is right, we should start implementing it. Because if we would have been banging this hydroplate theory this whole time, we'd have so much scientific clout. It's like, yeah, look at these 20 accurate predictions. How many do you got? You know, and so to get science to advance, we need to start shining this on it. Like when you hear a creationist speak, chat, you know, or ask, you know, what do you think about the hydroplate? And I did that, you know, years ago, and the guy said it doesn't work. And I asked him, why not? And he said, because it breaks laws of physics. And I asked him, well, what laws of physics? And he goes, I don't know, but the geologists I know don't go along with the hydroplate. And I was in an email conversation with one of the head geologists that he knows, and the questions he asked, realized he didn't really understand the hydroplate. And so just start asking about, we have to shine light on it. Or ask them, you know, could you have 2 flood models in here? And I did this just the other week. One of the big hitters in the creation movement, he was on a podcast, and there was the chat there. So I just started chatting questions about the hydroplate, you know. And one of the questions is, hey, can we discuss this without getting blackballed? Because I know a creationist who doesn't even want to be seen on camera asking questions about it. I know a videographer who won't make a hydroplate video because then he'll lose all his business with one of the organizations. So my thing is, we need the freedom to think, and then we need the freedom to come out of the closet. That's what my goal is at the campuses. I want the creationists to be able to have the freedom to think. Everybody should go along with that. And then we should be able to come out of the closet and be a creationist and not get fired. And so that's where the battle is. And if you want more information on the Grand Canyon, you go into rsr.org and search Grand Canyon Month, and you hear Bob Enyart and Brian Nickel talking about it. And Brian Nickel, he's got a great videos up there if you want to see it animated. A lot of the slides I show you, those are screenshots from his videos, or slides that he sent me to use. And he's got the origin of Grand Canyon in there, and that's probably the best at explaining what happened. And we're going to be doing the hydroplate theory. We had a hydroplate conference online at a couple of years ago, and if you want to see them, you can go into YouTube and look at the hydroplate theory. And we're also dropping them every night up until the week of celebration at the Hydroplate Week of Celebration YouTube channel. So I encourage people to go in there and subscribe. And then, and this is going to be December 1st to the 6th. And I'm hoping and I'm praying that the 9th edition will be available. They could do it. It could be available on Amazon, so it can be under Christmas trees. You know, a multitude of Christmas trees all around the world, if they just allow Amazon to do it for a limited time. That would be a tremendous boost to getting it into the mainstream. And so basically, God's word is true. You know, it's the framework for what we see out there. You know, it tells us what the framework is for biology. Everything produces after their kind, after their kind, after their kind. It's all in Genesis 1, you know. And the seed is in itself. That's biology. And geology is chapters 6, 7, and 8, the flood model. There was a big flood. That's where we get the layers of rock and the fossils. That's evidence for a flood. And you can do an experiment. Those dead deer on the side of the road, are those turning into fossils? No, they get decomposed and they scavenge. They're scavenged and decomposed. The only way a fossil forms is if it's buried rapidly. Therefore, any layer of rock that has fossils in it was laid down rapidly. And that's the whole geologic column. You know, that's supposed to be millions of years, and it can't be because it had to be laid down rapidly. And then it gives us the framework for the stars, astronomy. He made the stars also. We aren't going to see infant stars. And that's what Bob Enyart said when they were predicting stuff with the Hubble telescope. You know, it's like they were predicting to see the infant stars, and he says, no, you're just going to see normal galaxies. And Bob was right. Okay, and we're right again and again. And then anthropology, where did man come from, and these languages and the people groups, that's the Tower of Babel. You know, we got separated by our languages because there was big rebellion against God, and there's big rebellion against God today, so there's a judgment. You know, God judged sin with that Noah's flood, and he's going to judge it again. So we need to be about the Father's business, trying to get as many people in the lifeboat before the judgment comes. And you got a great pastor to lead you. So thank you so much.